Hello, hello, hello. Thank you for tuning in today. Eric Graham here with you. I hope you watched my last show. So I'm gonna, you know, discuss the genocide that's happening in Palestine. And a lot of times you'll hear politicians, uh, Israeli and American politicians, talk about the shared values between Israel and America. So that's related to a lot of propaganda that's basically just attempting to justify colonialism for greed and white supremacy. So here's Obama with Netanyahu. But
a larger point, one many are urging leaders of both countries to try to keep in mind.
The two countries really have very similar interests in the region and in the world. They share common values, and they actually want the same thing.
So they share common values and they want the same thing. These shared values, like I said,
similar interests in the region and in the world. They share common values, and they actually want the same thing.
Those shared goals stem from similar interests in the region as well as analogous historical experience.
They actually want the same thing.
Those shared goals stem from similar interests in the region as well as analogous historical experiences, which
analogous historical experiences. So, these so-called shared values and these common historical experiences. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about genocide. The United States also is a settler-colonialism project. And so Israel is a colonialism project as well, settler colonialism project. So Europeans who came to the so-called new land, new world, and the European Jews who were given illegally, immorally given the Palestinians land by
Mr.
British
President,
Empire.
welcome. It's great to have you here in the Oval Office and
by the UK at that time. So I'm just I'm framing the issue here, and what we're talking about is the propaganda that you hear concerning the alleged. Oh no, they are real shared common values. Concerning the propaganda that you hear concerning the shared values. The difference is what these people claim are these so-called shared values and what the real shared values are.
people of Lebanon, enhance the stability and security of the people of Israel, in my view. I've been, as you probably know, I've been working on this since I was Vice President of the United States, and I really compliment you. We're also going to discuss the ironclad commitment, and this is, I'll say this 5,000 times in my career, the ironclad commitment the United States has to Israel based on our principles, our ideas, our values. They're the same values.
Here we go. The principles, the ironclad commitment the United States has to Israel based on?
Ironclad commitment, and this is, I'll say this 5,000 times in my career, the ironclad commitment the United States has to Israel based on our principles, our ideas, our values. They're the same values. And I've often said, Mr. President, if there were not an Israel, we'd have to invent one.
He often says that. That's
We're
something
also going to
Biden says
discuss the
often.
ironclad commitment.
He often says, if there was not an Israel, the United States would have to invent it. Well, luckily for him, it was already invented by his brothers. The United Nation, the United States is the British Empire 2.0. I mean, it's basically that's the way that's something I say often. Biden says he says that often. I say that often that the United States is the British Empire 2.0. It's pretty obvious. You have New England, New England and all of the cities and towns that are named after English cities and towns. It's very easy to. It would be very difficult to debate me against that. To debate against me, and I'm taking the position that the United States is the British Empire 2.0. So you have the U.S. Empire, but they share the same roots.
And this is, I'll say this 5,000 times in my career, the ironclad commitment the United States has to Israel based on our principles, our ideas, our values. They're the same values. And I've often said, Mr. President, if there were not an Israel, we'd have to invent one. And I told.
So it's plain to see. It's very unfortunate that in 2024 that this continues. In my last show, I spoke briefly about Neanderthal DNA, and some people have a high percentage of Neanderthal DNA, and I also spoke about the traits that make species successful, like the wolves being friendly toward the early humans, developing that relationship. And human nature, also we help each other. Helping your fellow human being, it makes you feel good in your brain, and it's been very successful for the species. But unfortunately, there are human beings today that are dominated by their Neanderthal DNA. This is facts. And just briefly, I would say, hoarding of resources, hostility towards those that are different than you, outside of your group. These are traits that were developed in the development of Europeans due to the harsh conditions in the landscape for the early humans that were there, and the result is the behavior and the nature that I just described. So you could, and these are facts that can be verified, the percentages of Neanderthal DNA in different populations. So you compare and contrast that to the situation in nature in Africa, where there was much more resources, plentiful in terms of food, and you had a very much more favorable climate. So you had the rough, extreme, cold, harsh conditions of Europe with not much food available. And so human beings developing under those situations compared to the original humans that developed in the much more favorable conditions of Africa, for example, that I described. And these issues are these are complex issues. That was just a quick general description of what we're talking about here. But, this is why I say, systems need to be in place in order to account for the faults of human nature and prevent corruption and greed, racism from affecting hundreds of millions and billions of people. So the system needs to be, we need a new system. And the United States is in a very volatile situation right now, as well as the globe is in a very volatile situation right now. And this corrupt crony capitalism system in the United States, with its $1 trillion military budget and 1,000 bases all over the world, this has led to the conflict, the global conflict that we have right now, and it's about to go nuclear. So please watch my last show.
Our two nations are separated by.
But my point is, you see these guys here in their fancy suits. Just because this person here is in a fancy $2,000 custom-made suit, and he's a wealthy, guy here, not Romney specifically, but the point is that I speak about, Neanderthal DNA and the nature and the behavior. So these people, they're wearing these fancy suits and they have these, manners, but the acts that they're committing and causing are savage, brutal, barbarian murder and stealing. So this is Romney.
By more than 5,000 miles. But for an American abroad, you can't get much closer to the ideals and convictions of my own country than you do in Israel. We serve the same cause.
Here we go.
But for an American abroad, you can't get.
Just a quick reminder what I'm doing. We're talking about the shared values, because this is the phrase that you'll hear these corrupt politicians, Israel politicians and United States politicians use about their shared values.
Get much closer to the ideals and convictions of my own country than you do in Israel. We serve the same cause, and we provoke the same hatreds in the same enemies of civilization. It is. But for an American abroad, you can't.
That was extremely racist, what he just said. Extremely racist and extremely hypocritical. So these people, they are the savages, but he's wearing the fancy suit. He's got the money, but he's calling Palestinians and people in the Middle East. He's saying that they're not civilized. And let's remember that Egypt and other places in Africa, those are the creators of civilization, the founders of civilization. They had very advanced civilizations in Africa at the time when Europe did not have advanced civilizations. This is facts. These are facts of history. But now in modern times, these people, they want to rewrite history. And just a quick note, there's no racism happening here. I'm a biracial person with a Black American Christian father and a white Jewish American mother, with her parents had connections to Europe. But so there's no racism happening here. I'm explaining the facts.
Get much closer to the ideals and convictions of my own country.
Listen to what he says. This is very racist.
Than you do in Israel. We serve the same cause, and we provoke the same hatreds in the same enemies of civilization.
We serve the same cause. What cause is that? Colonialism, right? What are we talking about here? Why doesn't he specify?
Provoke the same hatreds in the same enemies of civilization.
And provoke the same
We serve
hatred.
the same cause, and we provoke the same hatreds in the same enemies of civilization.
Enemies of civilization. So we serve the same cause and provoke the same hatred from enemies of civilization. So he's supposed to be the civilized one, the people that commit genocide, that murder innocent women and children and babies. He's saying that they're civilized, and the people that they're attacking, the indigenous people whose land they're stealing and murdering, those people are not civilized and are enemies of civilization. I'll just hear that one more time. This is a good summary of my argument here.
Than you do in Israel. We serve the same cause, and we provoke the same hatreds in the same enemies of civilization. It is my firm conviction that the security of Israel is in the vital national security interest of the United States.
Addressing Iran, Romney said that the U.S. has a solemn duty not to let Iran's leaders act.
So, yeah, we're gonna take a look here now. How, right now, this current genocide that's happening in Palestine, it's happening right before our eyes. We're fortunate enough to have the technology to witness it, and in real time, we're watching a genocide happen. We might as well be living in medieval times. And so now I'm gonna begin to go connect, today to how this came about.
השתוללו בטנטורה, היה משהו נורא. טנטורה היה כפר עשיר, בתים יפים, גרים כמו אירופאים, אתה יודע, וגם אנשים היו לבושות ויפה, ובאמת היה כפר, אחד אנס שם איזה ילדה בת 16, משהו כזה, אתה מבין? אבל זה...
Okay, so what's so funny? I'm not sure. I'm going to read what he's saying just in case, anyone's having trouble seeing the small text, or if someone happens to be listening but not watching. I'm going to read this for you. And what we're watching here is there's an older man, an old Israeli soldier, who is remembering what occurred in the original Nakba, the tragedy in Arabic, the tragedy that happened in 1947 when the Palestinians were originally forced to leave their homes by the British, and then this project was taken over by the United States. So I'll read this for you. As this Israeli soldier is laughing about it, he's rape is a big part of Israeli culture. Let me just say real quick, I was doing some research earlier, and 61% of Israeli men say that there is nothing wrong with forcing a female into sex. 61%. They say there's nothing wrong with forcing a female to have sex with you. 61% of Israeli men say that. So rape is okay with 61% of the male population in Israel. And many Israeli soldiers, females, get raped by their fellow soldiers. And of course, in my last shows, I've showed you how I'm going to show you again here today, but it's a known fact now that Israeli soldiers are raping Palestinian prisoners, and the Israeli culture is supporting them in doing that. And as a matter of fact, they want to take it to the ultimate height, and they make it legal. So they're accepting of the rape, promoting the rape. And this is a fact. So he says, so here's an old soldier.
השתוללו בטנטורה, היה משהו נורא. טנטורה היה כפר עשיר, בתים יפים.
Here's an old Israeli soldier reminiscing about the original Nakba in 1947. So there was a rich village and had beautiful houses.
מדוע היה כפר עשיר, בתים יפים, גרים כמו
Its
אירופאים,
residents
אתה יודע,
lived like
וגם הנשים היו
Europeans.
לבושות
I'm
ויפה,
sorry.
וזה באמת היה כפר, אתה יודע,
Its residents lived
וגם
like
הנשים
Europeans.
היו
You know, the
לבושות
women of the
ויפה,
village
וזה
used to
באמת
wear
היה
nice
כפר,
clothes, for real. It was a village. One of the
אחד אנס
soldiers
שם
raped a
איזה ילדה בת
16-year-old
16,
girl.
משהו כזה.
He's laughing about it.
אבל זה מכוער מאוד, היה לנו
events
בחור
there
אחד,
were
הוא נפטר,
horrendous.
הוא היה פרא אדם, הוא לקח...
He's laughing about it.
אבל זה מכוער מאוד, היה לנו בחור אחד, הוא נפטר,
There was a guy with us, a soldier. He's
הוא היה
dead
פרא
now.
אדם.
He was a brutal human being. He took the Palestinians and put them in a
פשוט
cage
מאוד.
and killed them.
ורצח אותם בתוך המכלאות. בתוך המכלאות.
They gathered them in something like a
הם היו
cage.
במכלאות. אתה יודע, חוטי ברזל כאלה,
They put
עגולים
iron
כאלה,
wires
עשו
around
כל
them.
הגברים.
They gathered all the men,
הם יושבים שם כולם, על
put them
הרצפה,
on the ground,
ובא מישהו,
and one of the soldiers got
ולוקח
a submachine gun and
תת
shot them.
מקלע ומתחיל זה, מחליף מחסנית, מה אתה חושב?
He changed the cartridge. He said, "What do you think?"
אבל אנחנו לא היינו כאלה. הוא היה יוצא דופן, הבחור הזה, כן, מה שהוא עשה. והשתיקו את
They
הדבר הזה,
imposed a
והיו חבר'ה
cover-up.
שלקחו את הלוויורים,
There were
ורדפו אחרי
soldiers
חבר'ה
with
ושרפו אותם. זה היה
flamethrowers
משהו זה, לקחו את הלוויורים, ורדפו אחרי חבר'ה
and
ושרפו
ran after the
אותם.
villagers and
זה היה
burned
משהו
them.
זוועתי, וזה אסור לספר, אני לא אדבר על זה,
And no one is
כי
allowed to talk about that.
זה יכול להיות... נורא. טנטורה היה כפר עשיר, בתים יפים, גרים כמו אירופאים, אתה יודע, וגם הנשים היו לבושות ויפה, וזה באמת היה כפר...
So the original Nakba, the tragedy, it was called, you had European Zionists who came up with this plan to steal the Palestinians' land, so they needed to, come up with and England wanted to control the Middle East for the oil, and so they needed to come up with a way to do that. And so, that's why they took advantage of the situation after World War II, and they put the
70
they put
years have
the
passed since the Nakba, the catastrophe in Arabic, took place in Palestine in 1948, in which more than 750,000
They put the
Palestinians
European
were forcefully
Jews
displaced from their homes and pushed into refugee camps in East
into
Jerusalem.
Palestine. That was the excuse to control, to use to get the British control of the Middle East. And if you were really going to, as I've said before in previous shows, if you were really interested in some kind of a justice, because it was the Germans who did the Holocaust to the European Jews, why don't you make the so-called state of Israel in Germany? Why are the Palestinians forced to suffer for the bad deeds of the Europeans? European racism toward Jews, the Holocaust,
The West Bank, the
done
Gaza
by
Strip,
Europeans.
and neighboring countries. But the Nakba didn't end in 1948. The catastrophe continues to affect more than 12 million Palestinians, who remain stateless today. Historical Palestine was mostly made up of Palestinian Muslims, Christians, and a small number of Jews, who generally lived together peacefully. The persecution of Jews across Europe led them to believe that they were not safe there, and Zionists saw Palestine as a prime location for a Jewish homeland.
And it was clear that there were
Palestinians on the land. And some people they try to claim that there was, it's just so wonderful. There was just this empty land there, and so it was just waiting for us. It's just obvious nonsense. There was obviously Palestinians on the land, and they had to be murdered to steal their land. Just like Europeans, they claim the New World. They called the America, the United States. They called America the New World. And it was not a new world, it was an old world that had been occupied for, I forget, a long, hundreds of thousands, long thousands, tens of thousands, of years. So it was all just propaganda to steal, to justify and excuse stealing.
Memory of the Nakba is probably as strong or stronger today than it was in 1948-49. The majority of the Arab population of Palestine was expelled from their homes in 1948. People don't forget that, and their children don't forget that, and their grandchildren and great-grandchildren have not forgotten that. One of the things you have to understand is that Zionism is many things. It's a settler colonial project. It's a national movement. It involves the mobilization of enormous financial resources from Europe and the United States. It involves the building up of a potent military, but it is also a public relations project, a project based on the Bible, based on Christian Zionism, based on a belief that there is a reason for European Christians who are guilty of centuries and centuries, more than a millennium actually, of persecution of European Jews, mobilization of that guilt, and many other factors, to convince people that this is a just and a necessary project. The thing that pushed this into European and American consciousness with even more force was, of course, the Holocaust. A situation where Britain and the United States refused to allow Jewish refugees who could leave Germany before World War II began into their countries, but said, oh, let them go to Palestine. When partition was voted on by the United Nations General Assembly, and that resolution mandated a Jewish state in more than half of Palestine, it was clear that in order to turn that Jewish state, or the territory allotted to the Jewish state, into a majority Jewish polity, it was necessary to remove the Arab population. It
was necessary to remove the Arab population, right? So this is where it begins, and this has been ongoing ever since. And I've explained in my previous shows how even the so-called two-state solution was all a fraud. Israel never intended to allow Palestine to become a sovereign state, and the United States was a participant in this fraud. Please watch my previous shows. And so ever since then, it's just been a matter of watching the indigenous people be brutalized in the ways that I've discussed in my previous shows also. So the brutal treatment that Palestinians receive from Israel is worse than animals. Look at that. So, in case someone's just listening and not watching, we're witnessing here an Israeli soldier violently push a handicapped person onto the back of his head because he's sitting in a wheelchair. And so the Israeli soldier just violently pushes him, and so he falls and lands on the back of his head onto the concrete. After he pushes and there's an Israeli soldier kicking a guy in his groin. He's a concerned citizen who just saw the soldier push the man in the wheelchair onto the street and hit the back of his head. So then a soldier comes up and kicks him in the groin, and then they throw some kind of a flash grenade, and everybody runs away because they're worried about getting killed. And these soldiers, in these prisons, they even have children inside of them. Israeli soldiers, they just kidnap. Basically, they'll take your children with no charges. They arrest children and bring them to the Palestinian prisons. So here you see an Israeli soldier. He's in the process of arresting two small boys.
שלום לכם. מה קורה? ילדים שלך? זה לא ילדים. הכל בסדר, תתרחק. אל תתקרב אליי. אני לא מתקרב, אני באתי... ילדים שלך? זה לא ילדים שלי, אבל באתי לברר שמשפחה שלהם בוכה, זה ילדים בן שש... אתה מכיר את ההורים שלהם? אני מכיר את ההורים שלהם. אז תתקשר אליהם, חוץ...
This is so disgusting. So they've stated, the Israeli officials... The Israeli officials, they've stated with their own mouths, they make genocidal statements. The International Court of Justice, International Criminal Court, they've all found, they've found that obviously the Israelis are guilty of genocide, and there's an arrest warrant for Benjamin Netanyahu, and deservedly so. It's come out of their own mouths, calling Palestinians human animals, stating publicly that they're cutting off their water, electricity, and they've always been in control of the water and the electricity and everything that Palestinians can receive. It's always been from the beginning an apartheid state, and now it's a concentration camp. It's a genocide. It's an extermination. Total disregard for humanitarian law, the Geneva Convention, and all justified by the United States. The Secretary of State himself, Anthony Blinken, he said he's a Zionist. He's a proud Jewish Zionist. And, Biden, Blinken, they've all taken the AIPAC money. Check out the AIPAC tracker. You can go and see for yourself. Go online. Go to the AIPAC, AIPAC, the American Israel Political Action Committee, and look at all the money. Joe Biden's taken over $11 million. That guy that you saw speaking earlier, Mitt Romney, they've all taken hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars from Israel, from the Israel lobby, from AIPAC, and the money that the United States sends to Israel, it ends up back in the pockets of the corrupt politicians that facilitated it, because the AIPAC makes the donations to their campaign funds. So an Israeli airstrike in central Gaza has claimed the lives of 11 Palestinians, including a mother and her 6 children. This is what we're looking at here for anyone who's not watching, but only listening. We're watching some, dead bodies being taken away. So that's just day-to-day activity now. The murdering of families and children. It's just that's the way of life, a daily occurrence now. And diseases are coming. Starvation is coming. Israeli soldiers have been receiving polio vaccines, but not the Palestinians, which is a violation of international law because as the occupier, Israel has obligations and they're supposed to, if you're giving your own soldiers these vaccines, they're supposed to be given to the Palestinians also because they are being occupied by an occupying force, Israel. And the polio and these other diseases is being caused because of the
Palestinian Health Minister
destruction
says a
of
ceasefire
infrastructure.
deal is vital for medical teams to administer polio vaccines to Gazans. 1.6 million jabs are set to be provided to the enclave with the help of the World Health Organization. It's hoped a campaign to provide 2 rounds of a polio jab will be launched at the end of August across the Strip.
We had 3 suspected cases of polio, and samples were taken from the 3 patients who were babies. The samples were sent to Jordan for testing, and unfortunately, there was 1 positive result in a 10-month-old baby who had not had a chance to get vaccinated. This has ended 40 years Palestine being free of polio. We were the first country in the Eastern Mediterranean to be free of this disease.
I'm showing you. Remember, they came back to the original question of the shared values. And one quick thing, there's something called FARA, the Foreign Agent Registry. Foreign Agent Registry. I forget the other A. From another country. Foreign Agent Registry from another country. Anyway, the point is if you come to the United States and you're there on behalf of another country and you're talking to politicians and trying to get things done, make deals, whatever you're trying to do in representation of another country outside of the United States, you're supposed to register. And, the other day, on one of my other shows, I showed you I did a story about Scott Ritter, the former United States Marine and UN weapons inspector, who's doing good work and trying to promote better relations with Russia. And recently, and he speaks the truth about the genocide in Israel, in Palestine also. And the other day, he was his passport was taken away, and when he was at the airport on his way to fly somewhere, and he was not even given a receipt for it. So they violated his constitutional rights. And then after that, just like a week ago now, they did a raid in his home. The FBI raided his home, and they had a search warrant that stated they could only take a few electronic devices, but they violated the search warrant, and they actually took all of his documents, papers he was working on for a book, documents he had that go all the way back to the 90s during the illegal invasion of Iraq based on lies concerning the weapons of mass destruction that Saddam Hussein was supposed to have. So anyway, so he's thinking that they're going to be coming after him for the FARA, for not registering as a foreign agent, because they're going to falsely claim that he's working for Russia. But anyway, my point is that with all of the money that's given to these corrupt politicians by Israel, by AIPAC is not forced, not made to register as for the FARA. They're not made to register as a foreign agent representing another country. It just shows you the ridiculous hypocrisy and corruption that's going on here. Again, so these shared values, so what would they never specify what these shared values are. Sometimes they'll say democracy, yeah. So these supposed shared values that the United States has with Israel, what do they say they are? So again, they say, oh, well, they're the only democracy in the Middle East. And the United States calls itself a democracy. So both are lies. There's no democracy in the United States, as I've pointed out many times. The politicians don't give a crap about what average citizens think. There's been a Princeton study that showed the correlation between the amount of money a person has and the amount of influence they can have on their government. And these politicians are all corrupt. They're being paid. Billionaire donors are controlling the United States. The military-industrial complex, AIPAC, the other Jewish lobbying organizations, Big Pharma, corporations, Wall Street. There's no democracy in the United States. That's obvious. In Israel, there's no democracy. It's a theocratic, totalitarian regime. It's an ethno-state. So there's no equality. There's no democracy. So these shared values are, shared values of colonialism, stealing, murdering, to take what you want. You cut off that music. So, we're watching a cart that contains maybe some rice or some beans or something. And because all of the vehicles have been blown up, the Palestinians are reduced to, horse and cart here. And so they shot the horse. So this is the type of brutal, savage entity that the state of Israel is. And just as a side note, I've also talked about, watch my previous shows, the Orthodox Jews that are ultra religious. They're the real, the real Jews, the Orthodox Jews. They are not in favor. They oppose the state of Israel. The ones that you see with the black hats, the hair, coming down there, the Orthodox Jews, they're very opposed to. And I've showed in my previous shows, I've showed a scene where Israeli soldiers and the police, they're beating up, slamming Orthodox Jews onto the ground, body slamming them, pushing old men around, simply because they are Orthodox Jews that do not support the state of Israel, because it's against their religious beliefs. Actually, it's not supposed to be happening. They're not in favor. They don't support the genocide, the apartheid state that Israel is. And so they are actually in support of the Palestinians. I've showed them in my other videos during protest marches in favor of Palestine in the United States. And they are brave, very brave. The small percentage of the Israeli population that are the Orthodox Jews that are willing to stand up and speak the truth and voice their opinion against the state of Israel and its genocidal behavior.
Known as lynching, a grotesque form of mob rule without judge or jury. The first.
So now, what I'm doing here is I'm going over the shared values.
The Jim Crow era was marked by a reign of domestic terror known as lynching, a grotesque form of mob rule without judge or jury. The first reported lynching is said to have occurred in Madison, Mississippi in 1835.
So the shared values of Israel and the United States, both settler colonial projects, colonialism, settler colonialism, both situations where the indigenous people are going to have to be removed, murdered, in order to bring in the Europeans to take over that land. So what I'm doing here is I'm demonstrating the shared values, the real shared values.
Practice in the South. Notably, the brutal murder in 1955 of 14-year-old Emmett Till. Till.
Actually, I went backwards, but you know, the brutal treatment of the ancestors of slaves, the former slaves, the black people, African Americans in the United States. This
Was
is
kidnapped and murdered by two neighborhood white men after he was accused of whistling at a white woman in their store. His mother's insistence on an open casket.
So I'm sure many of you know the story of Emmett Till. So we saw him when he was alive, handsome young man. There on the left, there's what he looked like after he was brutally murdered by, you know, these white men that they're speaking about here.
Press photos of his mutilated body catalyzed the civil rights movement. Till's accuser would recant her story more than 60 years later. The last documented lynching in the United States took place 26 years after Emmett Till was murdered. In 1981, Michael Donald was attacked at random by two members of the Ku Klux Klan. He was beaten, then strangled, and hanged. Donald's mother filed a...
So the, you know, lynching, hanging of black people, that was a, you know, common occurrence. And, you know, many times, you know, there would be gatherings, celebrations, you know, and people would be there with their families. Could be there, you could bring your date. It could be date night, and you take, you know, take your date, take Sally with you to see the lynching, see the black man be hung by the neck until dead. And then maybe they would take the body down and drag it around, burn it, mutilate it, maybe keep some teeth or something as a memento of the occasion. You see strange fruit. That was some of you might know that Billie Holiday song, wonderful jazz song, you know, where she sings about the strange fruit, the bodies hanging from the trees, you know, and she wrote that song, Strange Fruit.
As evidenced, most brutally, by what happened all too frequently.
And so that song, Strange Fruit, was inspired by looking at black people's bodies hanging from trees.
After the Civil War and well into the 20th century. Pastoral scene of the gallant South, the bulging eyes and the twisted mouth. Those are lines from a Billie Holiday song, Strange Fruit, a haunting ballad about the lynching of black people. According to the NAACP,
nature of going after somebody because they are black and then hanging them in the wind for all to see, and doing so almost in a celebratory fashion. And they didn't try to hide it. They literally put them up to send a message. It's terror, it's fear, it's absolute anger, it's the inability to do anything about it. I mean, to really just kind of have to take it, for lack of a better word, because we were disempowered. You had no means to rectify or even protect yourself. This is an era in American society that didn't look upon lynching as with the same horror that we do now. We need to come to terms with that and admit that. You have people who really think that somehow, well, everything's fine. We've gotten so much farther. We had a black president, therefore all the wounds must be healed. No, there still is always this undercurrent of a perceived threat, for lack of a better word. If you step out of your lane, there might be and there can be consequences. And that's what I really want people to take away from this, is this wasn't, 3 and 4 centuries ago. This wasn't 2 worlds ago. This is our grandparents' generation. And the fact that it was not done by these little nascent members of society, that they did so in seclusion and nobody.
So, yeah. Here's a nice evening out on the town here.
Around, like in the Klan, you can kind of separate yourself from. They came at night. They concealed their identities. They tried to keep it unknown and quiet. Whereas this is like the fair. Get the kids. It's Sunday afternoon. We're going to string one up. That's terrifying. And people like that think that we've somehow, elevated ourselves where that could never happen now. I'm a little apprehensive to buy into that. And one of the most profound things is you could be lynched simply because
You could be lynched for anything. You were being lynched just because you were black. And yeah, so yeah, I kind of went a little bit backwards here, but I could have started with the indigenous Native Americans. So there, the genocide of the indigenous Native Americans, that happened, simultaneously with slavery, and many runaway slaves, they would go and seek protection and shelter in the Native American camps and reservations, and many of them would be hidden and helped by the Native Americans. And
a long, desperate snake of humanity winds its way across the plains. Men and women, young and old, children of all ages, trudge slowly through the snow as sleet lashes their faces. Their warmest clothes, a poor American tribe from the southeast, many of whom had fought alongside the Americans during the War of Independence and again during the War of 1812. However,
and that's just ridiculous there, the betrayal. As he stated,
others would attempt.
There were, black people and Native American people who actually helped the United States fight, the Revolutionary War, and they were repaid with terrible, harsh, brutal treatment. They were stabbed in the back, and it's just like the treaties that the U.S. government made with the Native Americans. All the treaties were broken. They were never honored. Black people after slavery, they were supposed to be given 40 acres and a mule. That didn't happen.
To help them to their feet. But with so many falling by the wayside, it had long become impossible to help everyone. This group of dejected humans are from the Choctaw Nation, a Native American tribe from the southeast, many of whom had fought alongside the Americans during the War of Independence and again during the War of 1812. However, past loyalties counted for little regarding matters of expansion and the concept of manifest destiny. Their journey west during the devastating cold winter of 1830 to 1831 was just the first of many tragic forced migrations. Eventually, almost the entire Choctaw people were transferred from their homelands to lands labelled Indian Territory in what is today Oklahoma. And there was more. The Choctaw were later joined by the Cherokee, the Muskogee, the Seminole, and the Chickasaw as the United States sought to cleanse its lands of its true native people. These groups have been labelled as the 5 civilized tribes because of their openness to adapt to Anglo-American culture. These were the Native Americans that the new Americans got on best with and coalesced with in relative peace. Imagine what happens to the tribes they deemed uncivilized. In total, 60,000 people were forcibly displaced from areas they had called home long before the white man arrived, with 10,000 to 15,000 deaths along the way from starvation, attacks, the brutal elements, and disease.
Well, that's just
those numbers are vague because, to put it bluntly,
just the same, again, to the shared values, the real shared values. So the shared values that they will claim would be that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. So their claim to share the values of democracy, and democracy doesn't exist in either Israel or America or the United States. So it's all a fraud. There's no democracy in either one. So the actual shared values are, I'm laying out the evidence.
With the sound of drums and prayer songs, the remains of 9 Sikangu Oyate Lakota children returned home to their native land. Their story is a long and painful one, stretching back over 140 years.
There can be a lot of sadness here today.
Beginning in 1879, Native children from the Lakota and other tribes were sent to government-run boarding schools. The first group embarked on steamships from this point on the Missouri River, headed for a government school in faraway Carlisle, Pennsylvania.
A lot of the kids were probably, this was the last place they saw their parents. They brought them here and got on the boat.
Tens of thousands of Native children entered boarding schools. The project was meant to assimilate, to destroy Native language, culture, and religion, and to turn the young people into...
Look at that. Totally unnecessary. And these people, when I've researched the Native Americans culture a lot. My great grandmother was part Native American, and these were beautiful people. And they were such a good nature, good spirit, friendly, accepting. I mean, they were great warriors, and of course also, but they used to do counting coup, which is like they would, if a tribe had a beef with another tribe, they would do a mock fight, like a scrimmage in football, like sparring in boxing, or like a tournament, where they would fight, but not be out for total murdering and elimination of the neighboring tribe that they were having a problem with. So counting coup. I mean, these people, they were such a beautiful, creative, good-natured, and it was totally unnecessary for the Europeans to commit that genocide. They would have been, I mean, they were welcomed. I mean, the nature of the indigenous people, it's obvious that the Europeans could have survived and thrived along with the Native Americans. But it was just totally unnecessary to do what they did.
Thousands of Native children entered boarding schools. The project was meant to assimilate, to destroy Native language, culture, and religion, and to turn the young people into model Christian Americans. But many did not survive the school's harsh regime of maltreatment, neglect, and disease. For decades, the Lakota children lay buried in Carlisle Cemetery. But they were never forgotten. After years of effort to properly identify the remains and then carefully exhume them, children including Little Hawk, Hollowhorn Bear, Strikes First, Swift Bear, and others who left so long ago are surrounded by their people once more.
That's what we want for those kids, and for them to come home.
Does it make you feel emotional?
Yeah, kind of hurts, but I'm really happy.
Young Lakota reflect on the hardships their relatives endured.
I would have been full of terror. I would have been full of... I would expect nothing but death, to be honest. It's almost a nauseating feeling to realize what these kids been through.
The children's remains were placed on the ground inside a specially constructed teepee. There, surrounded by relatives and religious leaders, they were welcomed home in a private prayer ceremony. Later, the entire community gathered as the remains were laid out, wrapped in buffalo hides and surrounded by sacred sage. People prayed long into the night. The homecoming is an event of enormous emotional and spiritual importance to his people, says organizer Russell Eaglebear.
There's a reawakening of our people, and that's important. We can't be living in grief all the time.
And on the following day, the children were laid to rest in the local cemetery, home at last, in the land where they belong.
So sad. So I'll end it there. So the common values the common values shared between Israel and the United States. The racism and brutality of settler colonialism, destruction of culture, theft, destruction of people. But you know, the Palestinians, they're going to survive, and you know, the United States, they failed to, you know, wipe out all of the Native Americans, but Israel, they're also going to fail. And when you look at the U.S. empire and what they've created since those times, it's just been, you know, one thing after another, you know, brutality, invasions of other countries, slavery, stealing. You see now we're in a situation of in a very dangerous and precarious situation where the entire earth is at risk from nuclear war. And so, you know, the fall of the U.S. empire is connected to the fall of the state of Israel, and they're interlocked now, and we're witnessing it. Basically, you know, the entire world, other than a few European countries, is coming together now. You have the BRICS nations coming together, and it's a rejection, a long time coming, a rejection of European world dominance and colonialism. So this is what we're looking at now, and you know, the danger is, you know, the United States empire, the leaders of the empire, the oligarchy. What lengths are they? You know, they're sociopaths, and the danger is, you know, are they willing to burn the whole world down around them in this effort to maintain and hold on to their empire and their global dominance? Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm establishing this schedule now of Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday, 4 p.m. Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'll be, you know, dropping new videos. So thank you so much. Please subscribe. Please subscribe to the channel. I'll see you next time. Peace out.